I'm Ann Dart.
I'm Tracy Stormy.
And I'm Kathy Knight.
And together we are
It Was a Dark and Stormy Book Club,
a podcast for mystery lovers.
Welcome. Hello and welcome to Bookends number 21. It is a little warmer here in Maryland this week than it was 2 weeks ago.
We're supposed to have a polar vortex this week.
My daffodils are coming up.
So are mine.
So there is hope. Spring is coming eventually.
But we are having an ice storm tonight.
Well, that's tonight. Maybe it'll preserve my little daffodils. But how is everybody?
Just peachy.
Good. Anything going on?
No.
No? It's been a quiet week with this cold.
It's a good time to just stay in and read a good book.
Read a lot of good books.
And with us going through the nominations for the Agatha Awards, boy, I have a lot of books to read.
That's all I've done all week is read.
If I didn't have this thing called a job.
I don't have that, but I have a husband. And
I've got that too.
Well, yours isn't the job, mine is. But anyway, we'll go on.
I digress.
Today we have two excellent books we're going to review. First is called The Second Rider, and it's by Alex Beer. Alex Beer was born in Bregenz, Austria, and she studied archaeology. She now lives in Vienna. And this is her English language debut. The Second Rider is her first book featuring Agent August Emmerich, and it was awarded the Leo Perutz Prize and received very enthusiastic reviews. It's distributed by Europa Editions and was translated into English by Tim Moore. You can read all about Alex and her books at her website, alex-beer.com. Now, this book is translated from German, so a little bit of the language phraseology. Every once in a while, I caught a few little oopsies, but for the most part, this book was wonderful. I just loved it. And a synopsis is, The Second Rider is the first volume in a gripping and best-selling series featuring police agent August Emmerich. Vienna, post-World War I, is a pretty desolate and run-down place. It's been scarred by World War I, in which the grandeur of the Habsburg Empire is a fading memory, and it's surviving by its wits, living hand-to-mouth in a city where crime, prostitution, and beggars are just everywhere. There are shakedowns on every street corner. The black market is the only market, and shortages of vital goods create countless opportunities for unscrupulous operators. Basics like coffee and eggs are a real treat. The streets are occupied by the homeless, and many are soldiers returned from war to find a different city from the one they left. Much of the black market functions underground, literally, with the sewers used to store and transport goods. Some people have grown very rich, indeed, on the back of illegal trade. Into this cauldron of vice comes Inspector August Emmerich. He is a veteran of the war himself, and his ambitions lead him to break the rules when necessary. His abiding wish is to join the Viennese Major Crimes Unit. He uses alcohol and way too much heroin to control the pain from a war wound. He and his junior partner, Ferdinand Winter, are involved both in tracking down black market smugglers and investigating a series of murders in the city. The two cases overlap when a corpse is found in the woods outside the city, and it's immediately labeled as suicide. Emmerich, convinced it was nothing of the sort, sees a chance to prove his mettle. The Second Rider is a really good and human thriller. It grabs you. The characters are very well drawn. Some of them are very humorous and some of them are very dark. Emmerich himself, you really begin to feel his pain. He's lost everything being in the army. He comes back. He's got his job as a police department. He's finally got a family that he loves, and that's ripped away from him. It's just, his pain is just, you can feel it reading the book. But the book is more than that. Many of the streets and the buildings in the book are still there. It would be a great fiction trip to take to Vienna to walk the streets that are in this book. This is the first book of hers, translated into English, like I said, but now she has a large and loyal following in Austria and also now in the U.S. She is a very bright talent, and I hope people will read more of her book. And that's my review of The Second Rider.
Well, very good.
I highly recommend it.
Well, I love historic fiction, and especially if you throw a good mystery in there, too.
Yeah. You never know when you pick up a book, is this going to be something that's going to grab me, or is it going to be something? And it goes about World War I, and I'm going, maybe not. But as soon as you meet...
Well, that's it. Sometimes you just got to plow through actually, it's your own misgivings. And then once you get past that, a lot of times you're pleasantly surprised at what these authors have to offer.
Well, once you meet the detective and you hear a little bit of his backstory and why he's drinking and why he's taking heroin, and then certain things happen relating to the war that tears his whole family apart, and it's just heartbreaking. And so that does it. You're on Team Emmerich the rest of the story. You've got to know what happens. It's a really good mystery. Like an
underdog type.
Yes, definitely.
Well, now we're going to take a walk on the strange side of the street. And when we first started this journey, we had said we were going to do strict mysteries and not veer off to the left or the right. But as
that didn't last long.
Well, we realized we were pigeonholing ourselves and not including genres like thrillers, like true crime. So we broadened our horizons, and I'm so glad we did. Well, this one kind of goes even a little further to the left than the thriller genre. When I started reading this, I thought, wow, this is more science fiction than thriller. But as I got into it, I got it. This book is not a traditional mystery in any way, shape, or form. I'll leave it up to you. I'll read you. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Anne Lawrence Mann, who wrote Coma Dreams, the book I read, which is the second in the Blue Warp book series. This is going to be a trilogy.
Blue Warp.
So this will be a trilogy. So there'll be one more book coming out. And Lawrence Mann is the author of the Blue Warp book series and a lifelong reading fanatic. His works are largely described as suspenseful, but frequently incorporate components of fantasy, science fiction, and humor. As a recovering addict, Mann provides a unique perspective in his books that blend the psychological and the physiological effect of addiction. Mann spent many years working as a songwriter, creating soundtracks for independent films. His first novel, Full Breach, was an International Book Award finalist. You can visit him at nlawrencemann.com, and we will update the show notes with all that information.
Oh, yes.
This was the second in the Blue Warp trilogy, and in this one, with this being the second in the series, I got caught up to speed rather quickly of what happened. They rescued somebody from a cult. These books involve some I don't want to, time travel's really not the thing, because they travel into this thing called the blue warp. And there's a drug that's involved in both these books that is called glow. I think this is just a made-up drug. I don't think it's like a nickname for a drug that we have, because it takes you into this other realm. It's like a dream.
Is it like a recreational drug that people take? Oh,
yes.
okay.
Struggling with inner demons after the loss of his child, retired Air Force Colonel Brett Stafford is in search of missing pieces in his life when he is involved in a single car accident and slips into a coma for 6 months. Using his newfound and unrefined ability to heal, Brennan Reynolds attempts to revive the colonel on the day his life support is to be terminated. Brennan is only partially successful, as the person awoken is not Colonel Stafford. This colonel is dangerous. Pressured by time, Brennan and his friends must try to piece together what went wrong and how to reverse the process before further tragedies occur and the colonel loses himself forever. It was edge of your seat type of book. My goodness. Some of the scenes in this book, some of the chase scenes, they go all the way from Arizona to Massachusetts.
So is Stafford the protagonist, or is there...
No. Brennan is the protagonist. They select somebody to help with this ability they have that Brennan can bring people back from the brink of death. So they selected him based on their criteria.
But the guy that, when they brought him back, he's not the same.
Somebody else kind of jumped into his body, and it was a female, and she's not of this world. At least I think. Maybe I missed something. I'm not really quite sure.
Sounds weird.
Yes, it was very weird, but very, very good. And there's a cat that can talk in this book. And
I have a cat that talks.
And his name is Snippety. And I read the back of N. Lawrence Mann's book, and he based that on a cat that he had that was, I can't remember the cat's name. I think it was Snappy or something like that. I'd have to go back and look that up. But when he comes back and becomes violent, Brennan leaves right away after bringing him back and travels back to Arizona where he lives. When this being wakes up in Colonel Stafford's body, she goes on a hunt to try to find out what happened to her. She gets on a bus and travels across country. She makes it over there, but everything goes awry, and he ends up going back, and so they're chasing him across the country. But like I said, this is not a traditional mystery, but I tell ya, the ending brought me to tears.
Oh, really?
Yes. And it was a very good ending. I love the way this book ended, because I was like, how are they going to wrap this all up? And I'm really curious to see what direction they're going to go with the next book, because I will definitely be reading it, even though this is so not my genre of book, but it just grabbed me and did not let go from page 1. And it was like a 450-page book, but I could not put this book down.
Huh.
And Lawrence Mann answered some questions, and I thought some of them were kind of interesting. Somebody asked, what the hell is the blue warp? And he said, good question. You came to the right person. The theory of relativity, our best explanation of the very large, and quantum mechanics, our best explanation of the very small, don't get along at all. Like Scott Barrett from the first book says, unless the two are reconciled, all cosmic bets are off. In other words, we can't completely discount the possibility of the impossible just because we don't currently have the capacity to understand it. Within the disconnect lies the blue warp, the possibility of an infinite consciousness in which we are all connected. The blue warp is proposal, both a what if and why not, that are tapped into and personified by addiction.
Now, is Brennan the protagonist in the first book also?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yes.
So he's the continuing
There's
figure.
a whole group that are together. It was very interesting, and he's got my interest. I will definitely read the second one. I may even go back and read the first one because it sounds very compelling. And
Yeah, these sound interesting.
Yes.
I have to. It's beyond my understanding.
yeah, it's a little hard to understand unless you read it. And actually, I would say a good quarter of the book through, I wasn't even sure what I was reading yet. And